Hello, and welcome back to episode 10 of Veridian County, our realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to go through a tour of our city. It's episode 10, and I think that every 10 episodes we need to do a little world tour to see the different progress that has been made in Veridian County so far. We've done a lot in this world, and I think that it's important to take a high-level overview of our build every so often to remind ourselves where we're at and what's still to come. Before we dive into the tour that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we expanded our 2-lane bidirectional rural highways to a base standard of 4 lanes throughout our map, taking road maintenance and regional construction projects into account and ushering in higher volumes of through traffic across our roadway network. Following that expansion, we reevaluated our highway plans to ensure compliance with Federal Highway Administration standards, and then we created a number of custom interchanges, 2 of which involved a completely non-standard interchange design to handle a high volume of traffic and integrate with multiple highway connections into our downtown street grid. In today's episode, I want to move through the entirety of Veridian County, effectively looking at the progress that we've made on an episode-by-episode basis, just touching base and recapping what's gotten done in the last 10 episodes since this series has started. But first, I just want to thank you all for the support that you've shown me throughout this series. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm very grateful that all of you have chosen to spend your very valuable time here with me, watching me build up this wonderful county of mine. This is absolutely my dream city, one of my dream projects, and I'm having just so much fun with it. I know that there's other games coming out soon, like City State Metropolis and Subway Builder, that I'm absolutely going to be touching on. And I know that City Skylines 2 is just not in a very good state right now, but I'm still having so much fun with it. Regardless of that, this is one of the most capable city painters that's ever existed. I can watch the simulation, I can watch the game, I love the graphics of it. I'm still having a lot of fun despite all the many issues and every episode I crash at least 3 to 5 times and it's really painful, but I deal with it because I just have so much fun and I love the end product so much. So I thank you all for supporting me and watching these videos. You make it all worth it, and it makes me very happy to know that I get to share my creations with other people. Editor Zing interjecting over here, and I realized that in this introduction I don't really give a proper context to where Veridian County is in the grand position of the world, so I wanted to show you something. This is a map that I showed off in the last episode that I created a couple of months ago at this point, just to locate where our city is in the real world. The city of Lemuria and Veridian County overall is located on this peninsula of mountains, kind of where Victoria lies in the real world. I actually edited it to move Victoria out closer to the Pacific Ocean, and I stole their spot, haha. I edited the Strait of Juan de Fuca and all of these different islands around here, the San Juans, are no more. But I placed the city of Lemuria right here in between Seattle and Vancouver, with the idea being that there's a couple of bridges for highways and trains connecting up to both Olympic National Park to lead down into Seattle and Vancouver up through here. This is where Veridian County is, with the city of Lemuria as the largest city, followed by Brightwater and Puerto Solana as our smaller little outpost cities, kind of similar in size to these other outpost cities from the major Vancouver and Seattle metros. The city of Lemuria is located in the Pacific Northwest, and it really tends to take a lot of inspiration from Seattle, New York, and Hong Kong, which are the main cities that I have lived in over the course of my lifetime, and I just think they're fantastic cities. They're very urban, they all have their own different merits and downsides, and I think if I can blend all of those into a Pacific Northwest themed city for here in Lemuria and Veridian County overall, I will be pretty happy. Anyway, this background out of the way, let's get back to the video. Let's begin with the work that we did in episode 1. A large part of episode 1 was really spent planning out this map and creating all of these different districts. We did that in Google Drawings and then brought them into game, but in order to do this we had to create some lore for the city, and I thought it would be a little bit fun to take a look at how that lore stands up to the test of time. Along the dramatic coast of the Pacific Ocean here in the Pacific Northwest of America, a new county has been formed. With hills, mountains, complex waterways, and an abundance of gorgeous greenery, this region has been named Veridian County. Unlike cities in the east like New York and Chicago, where growth was more concentrated around a single major city, Veridian County's development is going to be more dispersed among a number of major ports in the region, each of which will use the area's harbors and rivers to fuel their growth. These cities will occasionally compete for county resources, but they'll all share the same coastal industries of shipbuilding, logging, fishing, and coastal trade. And each city in Veridian County will work together to build the region into one of the best places to live in the world. Looking back at this lore, I am pretty happy with how it's turned out overall, except for one thing. We got a pretty good start on the city of Lemuria, but we have not started to build out downtown Brightwater nor Puerto Solana at all. Downtown Brightwater is still extremely empty, with nothing but a couple highways rail lines, and a bunch of farmlands that runs through it, basically coming up to the end of this peninsula over here. And Porto Solana, while we did begin to develop Soul Industries over here in episode 7, which we'll get back to later on, Porto Solana is pretty empty right now, save for a singular train station and a road and a highway that runs through it. So we've got a lot of work to do in the future, and don't you be thinking that any of these cities are anywhere near complete. But at least the city of Lemuria is in a pretty good place. Continuing on with the lore from episode 1, we actually have some lore from the city of Lemuria itself. In the earliest years, settlers pulled up to the coastline of this indigenous land, and in this fantastical world, they worked to create a society rich with urban infrastructure and natural beauty. The city of Lemuria came first, as ships began to fill up to the first peninsula of solid lands that these explorers could find. The shallow hills began to be built upon, and the city's Old Town was built. Old Town was the first neighborhood in the city with narrower streets, brick buildings, and architecture more reminiscent of the earlier cities over on the east coast. As the cities began to grow, the forests of the regions were chopped down to make way for sprawling farmland, fueling not just the city of Lemuria, but other cities in the region of Brightwater and Porto Solana, solidifying the county's position in the country and internationally as a major trading partner. So yes, I haven't gotten to build Brightwater or Porto Solana yet, but this does begin to explain the lore of the city of Lemuria. In episode 1, we began to develop Old Town over here. We began the world with a singular roadway that ran around and looped around this peninsula, and connected it up to the harbor that we've now named Pier 36. Pier 36 had a number of ships that stopped by it daily, bringing passengers and new citizens to the region as the city's Old Town grew. In episode 1, we placed down all of these brick buildings and drew out the foundations of this district, which is still, quite frankly, one of my favorites in the city. It's very reminiscent of the Old Town in Boston, as well as Pioneer Square here in Seattle, with the many low-lying brick buildings all cobbled together on tighter, narrower, less gridded streets, with an abundance of public transit serving it to make sure everybody still has access. It's also a fairly residential neighborhood, and a mixed-use neighborhood too. A lot of these brick buildings will have retail on the ground level, with apartments or offices above them. I've even used some static ploppable buildings over here just to really shape some more unique developments like this port over here, which is very directly inspired from a place in Boston, and I really like how this turned out in our game. We did spend most of episode 1 planning out the city, so the actual in-game buildable portion didn't get very much level of development. So in episode 2, that's when we went back through, we combined all these buildings together and meshed them together to create something that's a little bit tighter and more cohesive. We added in some of these parks, and we recolored every single building to feel a little bit better, because by default, buildings like this were the same pink color of these firehouses that I can't recolor. And having a bunch of pinks and purples in the middle of this brick-towned area just didn't really feel right. Moving on, in the second episode, we began to develop Grand Central Station. Now, this is a region that is surrounded by other development that we touched on more in later episodes, but after fixing up a little bit of Old Town, we created this entirely custom Grand Central Station, cobbling together a number of different assets. First, we started with the modern multi-platform train station, which gave us our through tracks where we could have terminus stations for any of our commuter lines, as well as a bypass track for our cargo line. Then we added in the historic Mediterranean portion, cobbled that in right up front and recolored it to match. And then we added in a recolored version of a Japanese asset using a static ploppable building to effectively create an office tower right on top of Grand Central Station, with a couple of rooftop pieces from the universities to link everything up. Altogether, this created a fully custom building that looked like it's evolved over time, where you started with maybe one portion, you grew on an entire second platform, and then you built an office tower right on top with a brand new roof and maybe even some fountains inside. This multi-generational building was one of my favorite things, especially as an architect. I love creating these custom buildings, and boy did I have a lot of fun creating this one. The last thing we did in episode 2 was actually to begin to draw out some of the downtown roads. We created the Marina District by infilling a whole lot of land into the bay that we have over here, creating this really unique shape that was meant to support the skyscrapers of the future as Old Town was beginning to be outgrown. The planners here in Old Town began to develop Central Business District, the Waters District, and the Marina District to support higher levels of growth fueled and spurred by modern technology. And drawing out that road network allowed us to begin to think about where the highways would go, where the exits would go, and how this region would then come together. We didn't actually revisit this area until episode 4, so first let's take a look at episode 3. In episode 3, we developed Old Road Bay. Old Road Bay is the name that was given to the Port of Lemuria's industrial district, where the entire topography of this once pristine natural bay with beaches and water flowing up onto the low-lying lands was completely transformed. The ground was raised ever so slightly, with quay walls poured in onto artificial islands and artificial ports to support multiple piers for cargo traffic. Ooh, look at that weirdness with the recoloring right there. I hover over it and it turns yellow, then I unselect it and it turns back to white. It's kind of strange. The entire area that we worked on in episodes 2 and 3, including Grand Central Station and Old Road Bay, was once a marshy, low-lying area in between the two slight hills that we have for Greater Grand Central, Old Town, and the rest of downtown. This whole area was filled with water, often got flooded, so the city's developers then redeveloped all of it into the train station, where you couldn't really build land on this marshy ground, and the industrial district, where everything was a little bit lighter and didn't necessarily need to deal with as much ground settling or high-risk uses like residential buildings. As I worked on Old Road Bay, I also added in a couple of highway interchanges and connections all throughout the region just to begin to fuel some traffic into here. It was incomplete at the time, and quite frankly, looking back, I'm surprised that I published an episode with that level of detail. All of these first few episodes had some degree of incompleteness in their work. Episode 1 didn't have Old Town complete, all the colors were wrong and all the buildings were messed wrong. Episode 2 didn't build anything out around Grand Central. Yes, sure, it created this marvel of engineering and architecture that in the real world would have probably stood on its own for a little bit until the development was spurred all around it. But in City Skylines 2, it's not quite as impressive to create a singular building, which, cool as it is, doesn't really feel like it has the adequate context until you build all around it. Episode 3, we left Old Road Bay pretty barren. Surfaces like these were just left as grass for a good amount of time. None of these industrial businesses were left around. All we had was this little sliver of industrial district that I spent a good amount of time on, and I'm still pretty happy with, quite frankly. This one was detailed really well right next to Lee's train yard to support the Grand Central Station that we built up in the previous episode, and with the highway curving around it, this area just feels really special and unique, and adding in the trees and everything makes it feel a little bit less like this super concrete-y industrial area as you travel inwards towards the city. Speaking of the skyscrapers, we're moving on to episode 4. Episode 4 was another one of those episodes where I really began projects but didn't finish any of them, and to this day I'm living with some of the consequences of that. In episode 4, we placed buildings all the way from Old Town, through the Waters District, through the Central Business District, through the Marina District, all the way into Noto, as well as placing districts and roads in Greater Grand Central. Now yes, this was pretty impressive. We got to consider the way that our skyline looks. We placed many of these most important buildings that really impact the view of the city from the water. But at the end of the day, when you look down from above, there were grass spaces left everywhere, kind of like this Noto area where you had a couple buildings plopped in, but it just didn't feel complete. And episode 4 released months and months ago at this point, and I only got done filling out up to the Marina District, like last episode. I still haven't filled out Noto just because it's taken me so long to finish off and fill through the progress that we left undone in episode 4. I did the same thing in Greater Grand Central where I placed down just a couple of buildings, and I didn't actually revisit this for a little bit further after this time. Episode 4 is where I began to think about the lore a little bit more as well. That rhymes, doesn't it? The lore a little bit more. So as I was saying, Grand Central Station used to be a marshy lowland and now has Grand Central Station as an engineering and architectural marvel. If you head north from there, you have the Central Business District, which was the first area that was planned by the leaders in Old Town for larger scale office development. As the city boomed, this is where the first and the oldest skyscrapers and offices were built. So you see some older brick towers that begin to soar up into the sky over here, like this building here at 86 Sunnyside Street, one of the first and tallest buildings on the West Coast at the time. As the Central Business District began to fill out, the Waters District began to receive some of the overflow office growth. This Waters District was named after this tiny little lake. Adorable, I know. The Waters District drew a ton of attention to the city of Lemuria with the construction of the Waters building over here, which was the Imperial State Tower. This was the tallest building west of the Mississippi at the time, and the Waters building, being such a prominent building in this portion of the world, drew a whole lot of attention to the little city of Lemuria, and the city was growing so quickly that it created this entire infill portion of land called the Marina District, which eventually became the densest, wealthiest, and tallest neighborhood in the city. Nowadays, this has the tallest building in the area, as well as the first residential building on the city of Lemuria's version of Billionaires Row, which is eventually possibly going to be this area of Middle Street, where billionaires just start to buy out parcels and build these pencil skyscrapers wherever they can. The Marina District is really modeled off of the financial district in downtown New York City. You've got some really fantastic architecture there, you've got some great park spaces, you're right by the water, and of course, you've got your stunning brick buildings all lined up in a row to create some gorgeous streetscapes. And of course, you cannot forget about the little churches. There's lots of buildings all around there, but in the midst of all of these high rises and all of this old style brick building, you just have a little church that's taking up some land, and no one cares to deserve it because then it would be desecrating graves and you'd be upzoning it. So instead, the little historic church has stayed there for the city's whole life. Still in episode 4, we began to develop the greater Grand Central area because I think at this point I'd realized that just building Grand Central in episode 2 didn't really feel cohesive. So I started to build up Greater Grand Central up on top of the hill that Grand Central Station connects right into, and Greater Grand Central was really intended as this very tourist-focused area. It's right next to the Stadium District, it's right next to Grand Central Station, so a lot of people who are going to be taking transit only and don't really have access to cars are going to easily want to come in here for games, for events, and to stay in hotels. So this is where we built up a lot of hotels that to this day have nowhere near enough customers staying in the beds. Like, look at this, 0 rooms are rented in this 5-star hotel. Poor guys. I figure they're not really getting by. Yeah, look at that balance, minus 280,000. Gosh. Greater Grand Central was really intended to be this master plan district, and in episode 4, I started it out with this fountain and with some of the road grids around here, placing down the hotels, but I really wasn't sure where I wanted to go with it until episode 6, so we'll get back to Greater Grand Central when I touch on that. But first, Episode 5. Episode 5, Veridian County, is where we began to build the Sphere. Now, this was originally modeled on the Vegas Sphere. This was a roughly 2/3 scale, if I remember correctly, version of the Vegas Sphere, and it took me a whole lot of time and effort because each one of these is an individual panel. And I was super proud of this build, despite the fact that I apparently, look at this, didn't fill out anything else in the Stadium District and still haven't. This is a project for the future of our city. I haven't figured out what stadiums I want to use for inspiration yet, so please, if you have thoughts on stadiums to use for inspiration, do let me know, because I'm happy to hear them, and there's a good chance they'll end up recreating them in game if it's gorgeous enough and, you know, doable to recreate. But I'm pretty happy with how the Vegas Sphere turned out. After I published this video, I actually got a comment on the video telling me that since I had panelized this building, since I'd shrunk it down slightly, and since it's all white rather than LEDs on the outside, I didn't create the Vegas Sphere, I created the Stockholm Globe. And that was just the funniest thing to me. I'm like, I looked that up. I'd never heard of this building before. I was like, you are so right. I just created the Stockholm Globe. I completely didn't create the Vegas Sphere, and that's on me, but I don't have a problem with it being the Stockholm Globe. I realized after I created it that you actually can't recolor these French panels. You also can't put decals on them. Like if I hover right here, you see there's a chirper decal that I made an attempt to place on there and completely failed. So we're probably going to be stuck with this white mode until I create a custom asset and tear this entire sphere down. But at least for now, I don't want to touch it too much because I'm still pretty happy with it. And it took me hours and hours and hours of work and lost footage, unfortunately, at the time because I didn't have as good of an SSD. But I was pretty happy with how the sphere, or should I say the globe, it turned out. I'm still not sure what we should name it in game, but I figure we'll get to that once we develop the Stadium District. The other thing that I did in episode 5, because I lost some of that footage, was to really draw out our rail lines. In episode 2, we built Grand Central. In episode 3, we built our train yards. So in episode 5, I finished that off by adding in a couple of extra rail yards, one of which I slotted in over here in the city of Innovis, which is going to be a futuristic development that I make one day, kind of close to a rocket launcher, or maybe a space town or something like that. I don't know, we'll see. Some sort of NASA headquarters or something. So I placed down one train depot over here to support 12 trains, and then I placed down a second one all the way out, kind of out by the border between Lemuria and Vancouver at Borda Village. And oh, it looks like there's been a big traffic accident that's causing backups on I-67 right now. I feel like I should get on the radio station and say something like that. Is anyone going to secure the accident site? Yes, there's already a police car on the way, securing the accident site, and a road maintenance team cleaning everything up. Great, this should be cleaned up momentarily. Hopefully the traffic doesn't get too bad, but this is, quite the backup. Anyway, we placed down yet another rail depot over here with support for another 12 trains, so across all 3 of these train depots, we could support 36 trains in our region. And of course, I then had to draw out the rail lines to support all of this. So we drew out our parallel tracks running out to the Seattle border via Baby Village and Sycamore Industries, drew out a track through Seoul Village, and these were a little bit easier to do, mostly just follow the coastline, cut through the farmlands, and made their way up to these outside connections. These weren't too complicated of rail tracks, all things considered. We also drew out the Airport Express, which we've now reconfigured in the last episode, but we drew out a small little red line that went straight from Grand Central to the airport because I expect that we'll eventually have a train stationed in the International Airport asset. But the real meat of drawing out these train lines were the tunnels. Oh yes, the tunnels. A couple of them in the downtown area are super impressive. One of them makes its way underneath Hawthorne Street, where we had this intersection previously. It makes its way underneath Hawthorne Street, services briefly next to the lake over here in the Waters District, so that you can really see where the trains are heading, and then it goes back underground through Valley Hill, through Western Heights, before surfacing over here underneath this interchange that we made in the last episode. Then the parallel tracks continue all the way along the coastline, head into a second tunnel at Autumn Valley, head into a bridge in the university area, follow the coastline, head into another tunnel, a third tunnel in Kydon Industries, close to Seoul Industries, before it branches out to head to Port of Solana and into Vancouver at the Canadian border. Those tunnels were a whole lot of fun to make, and everything was starting to be awesome. With episode 5 done, it's time to talk about episode 6. And episode 6 of Veridian County is where I began to shift my mentality about this series. Rather than just starting things, starting builds here and there and leaving them all empty, I decided that I would be finishing things off when I get them started. I'd be finishing projects. So episode 6 was what I called in that video title a megasode, because we just did so very much. In episode 6, I was really focused on filling out any of the areas that we'd left blank before, besides the Stadium District, of course. That's something that requires a little bit more thought. So I filled out the entirety of the East Asian Cultural District and Greater Grand Central. I filled out the areas around these interchanges. I created a custom convention center. I filled out the East Asian Cultural District Hilltop area with department stores, put a city library in there, and started to create this new philosophy of having anchor points within our city, where each individual district has some reason for people to go there. In real life, each individual district has its own character, or maybe it's just a random part of the city, but because in City Skylines 2, we're effectively scaling a large-scale city down to the scale of this video game, it makes sense that your points of interest would be a little bit more clustered. So I created these points of interest within each of these areas that we developed as we went through them. In Greater Grand Central, I rethought that plan from episode 4, where previously we had some things kind of scattered around. Instead, I looked at some precedent imagery and I realized that master plan districts will often have a cohesive park network. So here we created a little bit of a park stretch, really leaned into the fountain idea where you got another strip around the fountain. At this park over here, we created these fairly major retail buildings that all front it, so you effectively create a large plaza over here. We created a skyscraper strip running down Hawthorne Street because, you would expect to see some density in there. And we created a custom convention center, which I did use a ton of static ploppable assets for, and I just effectively stitched them all together with pedestrian pathways and roofing changes. I even sunk this parking building down halfway into the ground and put that on top of a technical university extension wing, so you get this really cool rounded portion. And this is a massive convention center, the likes of which rivals San Diego and Seattle for its convention center size. And we can now host major events all throughout here. And then of course I started to put in a couple of little businesses inside of there just using the modular service blocks. All of that being connected up to these 2 parking garages, of course. With that kind of as our anchor of the district, along with these major roads and the parks, everything else was a little bit easier to fill in. I could put in some museums, some breweries, some hotels, some shopping centers, some residential, and really just fill out the rest of the district fairly easily. And I was pretty happy with how this had turned out, but we weren't done there in episode 6. Oh no, this was a megasode, and that was just the first portion of it. I also filled out the remaining area all around this major interchange that we created in one of the first episodes because, it felt okay in those first few episodes, but it didn't really understand why everything was so compact. There are so many layers that you got going on here for something that's really just a simple downtown interchange, and you're always wondering, why is this so overbuilt and so overcomplicated? And the reason is because the next major interchange is all the way over here close to the Central Business District. So this one over here is meant to serve Greater Grand Central, Old Town, the East Asian Cultural District's hilltop area, and the Waters District, all while mitigating subway tracks and tram tracks that are running through it, under it, and all around it. So this became a fairly complex interchange that really only started to make sense when I built out the buildings all around it. So I filled out the different areas all around here and slowly worked my way up and around into these different areas. And I was pretty happy with how this area turned out. We got a triangle building over here. We got this master plan development right here where it looks like they were all built by the same developer in the same style, just to slightly different heights, which I think looks pretty cool. Grand Central Station's final form was finally shown off, with a water feature out front and lots of other transit connections. We built up elementary schools and more residential offices and residential buildings, and we made our way into Chinatown, or the East Asian Cultural District. I call it the East Asian Cultural District because these assets are not exclusively Chinese. We also used some Japanese assets. We also used some buildings that could look like they're a little bit Korean, so I didn't really want it to feel like it was exclusive. And I also didn't want to call it Chinatown International District like Seattle had, because then I would be, ripping off the name a little bit too close. So I called it the East Asian Cultural District, and I'm pretty happy with that. It was the first Chinatown district that I'd seen in City Skylines 2. I know there are some people who have done them since then, and I know there are some people who done it beforehand, but it was the first full-on Chinatown district build that I'd seen and done, and I was really happy with this. I think this is around the time of my San Francisco trip as well, so it got a lot of inspiration from there. You've got your metro station leading right down a main road to the main gate, which leads into a tea house and a main park, and into the central library for the city. Of course, right behind that, you've got Dynasty Hotel, more piers and parks, and a whole lot of Chinese-style assets that just really, I am so happy with how they look and how they turn out, how they fit in this area. A lot of retail, a lot of business space, and this really just is such a vibrant area with people constantly walking around at all times of day, visiting areas like the Central Library. Look how much traffic this is generating, and making use of this metro station. By that point, I'd gotten all of this area in, so I just had to fill out this last area. So I slowly start to build up towards this hilltop district, placing down these department stores. This is technically a signature building that you're only supposed to be able to place one of, but why not? Place two down. It feels like you're made to place two down, even though the game doesn't allow you to. So I love how this looks. The theory is that some German investor or German transplants in the early days of the city came up here from Old Town and really tried to leave his mark on the city. So after building up some wealth in Old Town, he decided to build up a giant department store in the Hilltop District, which eventually was incorporated into the East Asian Cultural District. The Hilltop District is really another center for upscale mall shopping. You got your department stores as well as a mall over here, a fashion square over there, you get your parking lots, a theater, and a whole bunch of other buildings edging right up against this hill, which we also developed with stairs snaking its way up through the switchbacks of the road, all the way up to some parks up top and the city's main telecom tower for the time being. As we snaked our way back down from the Hilltop District, I created a couple of construction sites. You get one really narrow one in here right by the mall, and over on the other side you've got a little bit larger of a construction site. As you head into this transition area between the East Asian styles, the Hilltop and Old Town styles, and the more modern Waters District, you really get these more transition-y blocks that are getting upzoned and historically preserved and all that. You got another construction site in here, which, looks like they're building a small building over here, or maybe multiple. We'll find out in the future, maybe. And the last really cool thing that I placed down in this area is our first single family area, where they built in this Chinese style for the single family houses fairly early in the city's development. The city's developers were planning on expanding the Hilltop District into this area, building some high rises right up against the hill, and the residents stepped in and said, no, we must preserve these houses. So all these houses were designated into a historic district, and now they are some of the most wealthy, valuable houses in the entire city. There's some gross mansions, considering how dense this area is and how much of a housing crisis the city is in. The fact that there's houses with a tennis court just in the heart of downtown is gross. But hey, it's historic, it's preserved, and it's absolutely gorgeous. If you ever get a chance to go into one of these houses, let's do it right now. If I head into the photo mode, I can head down onto this first balcony with the egg chair over here. They built up a wall to block themselves from some of the sound of the trains, but you get this awesome view of the downtown skyline. And if you ever get tired of your view of the downtown skyline, you can head to the other side where you have your hot tub and your couches, and you can just turn around and admire the beauty of this mountain. All the trees, all the forest, all the private land that you got. These are some stunning mansions over here, and I absolutely love them. Episode 6 was a completely transformational episode for the city. Everything that you see in screen right here, episode 6 helped to polish. After I'd completed episode 6, in between episodes, I realized that my level of detail for everything over here didn't level up to what I had over here. As you remember from episode 4, I kind of left all these green spaces, so I started to fill in all this area off camera, like I said. But then we moved on to episode 7. In episode 7, I realized two things. One, we'd created this Grand Central Station with all of this infrastructure for trams and tram lines and tram roads, and we didn't have any running. So I created our first tram lines. We got some snaking through Old Town, some that go up into the hills, some that go out into Airlim, into Uptown, all the way along the waterfront to Birdsong Park, which we're going to get to in a future episode. Created all these different tram lines, and that added a whole lot more life into our city, and it allowed us to really put some placemaking into these things and understand how people realistically get around from, for example, from Grand Central Station to over here. They can go either around, take the subway line all the way around these loop backs up and then into the station, or they can hop on the tram, one stop, just over there. Cheap, easy, and quick. Loved adding in these trams, and in the process, we also created a couple of tram depots. One of them here in Airlim at the end of the tram line. This tram line might in the future extend into Verdon State Park, but I don't know. For now, it's fine. Ends right here in this tram depot that we built an interchange over last episode. And the other one is over here, kind of right by our landfill that we'd had and set up in the first episode. Right up on top of this hill, on this bluff, next to the train tracks, you build up and you get your tram depot. And then after doing that, I realized that we were solidly out of power. We were importing power to fuel the city. We had temporary wind turbines set up in our industrial district, ones that are meant to be disassembled and moved around and, you know, really temporary, because we hadn't had a proper solution for all of our power. So I kept some of those wind turbines here in Birdsong Park, but the main development of episode 7 was over here at Soul Industries. Soul is basically it means sun. I don't know what language. Is it Spanish? Is it Latin? One of those. It means sun. So you're harnessing the power of the sun, and you're harnessing the power of the sun to create your energy. Nuclear power was basically thought of as sun power at the time. It feels like magic. It feels like you're so powerful using these magic rocks to create massive amounts of power. Then on the other side, you got your solar power plant where you're more literally taking the power of the sun, but that came later. Soul Industries is one of my favorite developments of the city because I got to reference a real world build. I got to reference a map of the Cafrentes nuclear power plant in Spain to build this. I saw their diagram, I saw how they laid this whole area out, and I was able to establish a nuclear exclusion zone that sets the boundaries at Soul Industries between these rail tracks and these highways. This is our exclusion zone where we can't build any major uses, so instead this is all just a wonderful industrial area. Soul Industries had the ability to house over 1,000 employees and raised our power in our district from maybe a few hundred megawatts to 1.21 gigawatts. You know the quote. It happened. I got the numbers to work. Check it out. We're slightly lower than 1.21 right now. We're at 1.12, which is just enough of a difference to throw off any of the movie fans. They hear 1.12 gigawatts? What are you talking about? But yeah, power will fluctuate, but for the most part, we're at 1.21 gigawatts. So we're now exporting power and everything's going well. Episode 7 was a lot of fun, but then episode 8, oh, that was the one. Episode 8, I really wanted to fill out the district that we'd called Western Heights, but I wasn't sure what to do with it. At the end of the day, I decided to develop it into a civic center because I realized that there wasn't really a good place in our downtown area for a city hall. So instead, I built our city hall all the way up here with a city hall, municipal building, federal building, county administrative buildings and courthouses and state administrative buildings and parking and offices and all sorts of things. And this was really my opportunity to use French-themed asset packs. Because this district is very isolated, you know, it's got major roads and subway tracks and all of that bounding it in every which direction, as well as the hill, it meant that I could really use a different architectural style in here. And yes, it will stand out from the rest of the city as we begin to build up closer to it, but it's not too vastly different. You know, the overall urban form all works together with the rest of the city, and I'm fairly proud of it. Western Heights is the civic center of the city of Lemuria, and you've got some pretty cool things. First off, we got a little reservoir here in front of the federal building. In addition to all of the different French-themed offices, you've also got a pedestrian plaza right up here. This is where you got your different park spaces, you got your municipal court and city hall and county administrative building. Each one of these I filled with a handful of signature office building modular service blocks to really get the employee count up in this area. We've got a whole bunch of services around here, like a high-density signature business, high-density signature offices, as well as a medical center and a fair bit more. I've also got a parking garage right in here, underground parking garage with 2,200 spaces. So this is a really big dig, really to support the many employees of the federal building. And underneath this elevated pedestrianized plaza that we got over here for the civic center, where, by the way, we have our tram running through it. That's right, I redirected the tram line from the hill to run through the civic center. That's getting a whole lot of people. Look at all the Sims walking over here. I love them so much. Underneath this plaza, we've actually got more roads with more parking. Yes, this whole area underground here is its own parking garage, just to help add on with all of the many employees in this area. They all need somewhere to park, and by pedestrianizing this area up above, it kind of starts to limit that. There are a few parking garages scattered throughout here, but having some ground parking is pretty nice. This main through road that we got running through here also leads into a highway interchange that we built in episode 9, so I guess it's time to talk about that. In the previous episodes before episode 9, we actually just had these little 2-lane highways thinking its way all throughout our map. And while that was fine because we hadn't really developed it, I was starting to push the boundaries of Lemuria out, so it was time to develop at least the highways around here. These different highways got raised and expanded a little bit. We started off with this interchange over here between I-392, I-92, Old Road Bay, and the Stadium District. And this is a little bit complicated, but since we were building up on the hill, it wasn't all too bad. It's still pretty drivable, so from a driver's perspective, if you're trying to get in one direction, you know that you can just split off at each of these different points. The craziest part is right here at the termination of the Stadium District's Hamilton Street, where it just splits off in 6 different directions. But quite frankly, as long as you know which lane you should be in, it's not all too bad. Then we got standard Cloverleaf interchange over here. The one that's crazy is the interchange in Crescent City and Uptown over here, because we needed to bridge our downtown highway with our airport highway, as well as our airlim highway and our highway up to Vancouver. Each one of these different destinations led to a very important location. So I basically had to create a 6-way interchange with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 points that everything had to connect to. So this was a little bit complicated. I tried with the stack interchange, but I ended up doing something like this, and I'm pretty happy with it overall, despite it looking a little bit like spaghetti. Just a little bit, you know? Anyway, we've just about caught up in the downtown area of Lemuria, as well as Seoul Industries, so I just want to touch on a couple of other areas. In the whole area of Brightwater and Innovis and Hillside Flats over here, where we got all these different smaller towns and cities that we're going to build up eventually, I filled this all out with farmland just for now. Likewise up here, this is probably going to remain as farms, but I'm probably going to sprinkle in a couple of small villages like along the water and the hearts of some of these areas. But for now, I have, yes, kept them as farms. The only area that's not a farm is Seoul Village over here, right by the border, because I realized that I needed to have at least a little bit of population for this area to have people commuting a little bit closer, rather than all coming from downtown Lemuria all the way out to here for their daily commute. So I just built up a couple of social housing, high-rise type of programs. They definitely look like social housing, but hey, it gets the job done and it provides some of the necessary employees for this little area, even if, you know, the rest of our farmland is struggling for employees and probably still will. Frankly, this is all mostly for aesthetics and not nearly as much for the functionality of it, so it's all fine, completely good. All that said and done, that brings us to the end of this world tour. I'm very proud of the way that the city of Lemuria and Veridian County overall have been developing. I love how much planning I was able to do. I was able to locate it pretty well, and everything that's going on in the city, I'm really excited for the future of it. With all that explaining done, there's only one thing left to do. As always, it's the outro cinematics. Oh, you didn't think that I'd be skipping the outro cinematics this episode, did you? I hope not. We've got some amazing long cinematics coming on. I've got 2 rounds of cinematics, in fact. The first round is going to be every single time lapse and every build that we did throughout the series. Let's just see how it looks from the start of the map when nothing was built at all until its final state. Just see how much things have transformed. And the second is going to be an episode by episode time lapse to see how we developed and built the city from start to finish. I'm very excited to see these cinematics, so let's get on with it. Oh, Veridian County, how I love you. I've said this before, I said this at the start of the episode. This is really my dream project, and I'm so happy that I was able to start building this here in City Skylines 2. The game, with the region packs and the mods that have come out recently, and the detailers patch and everything, has gotten to a place where I can really create many of the things that I want to do in it. Not everything, especially when it comes to odd-shaped parcels or larger buildings, is a little bit hard to find and create some really unique builds, but I think I'm doing pretty well so far, able to shape downtowns and create areas in the world that I just feel like are so unique and so special, and I'm just so very happy with them. And of course, not only am I happy with the way that I'm playing this game and the way that I'm creating the city, despite my, occasional complaints, or maybe often complaints about City Skylines 2 as a game and the development process of it, I'm pretty happy with the city, and I'm most happy with how much all of you are appreciating these videos and watching them with me. I, quite frankly, am so happy. I started this series as a way to document my process as I build a city out, because oftentimes I'm developing and building them in a silo, and I'm investing just so much of my time for just not much appreciation from people. So when I was able to start editing these down and publishing them as videos, not only did I feel amazing creating these cinematics and feeling accomplished, it seems like all of you were appreciating them as well, and I am just so very grateful for that. So I'm going to end the episode right here, but as always, I want to thank you all for spending your time watching me today and through this entire series so far. I appreciate every single one of you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye!